Hello everyone, welcome back. We are now in Chapter 3, Unit 3. In this discussion, we will be dealing with two specific pricing techniques, which are usually covered in many professionally accredited strategic management accounting courses. Lifecycle costing and target costing. Lifecycle costing can be discussed in two different dimensions: as an asset management framework or as a pricing technique or product pricing technique. As an asset management technique, this is related to the acquisition or purchase of fixed or long-term useful assets. This is mostly discussed in public sector tendering processes or in the context of public sector acquisition of long-term assets. But it is equally applicable for private sector as well as even for our personal decisions as to the long-term fixed assets. The logic behind life cycle costing is very simple. Basically, when we are trying to buy or when we are making a decision as to buying a fixed asset, we have to consider the total life cycle cost of that asset. Not only the purchasing price or the acquisition price, but also the total operational cost that we have to incur in the future during the total life cycle of that asset. And also, finally, the disposal cost. So that means when we are making a purchasing decision, we have to first calculate, we have to first estimate what will be the total cost of acquisition. That include the purchasing price and any other expenditure that we have to incur to bring the product to a level of use, to bring it to a condition of usage. It can include, for example, commissions, delivery cost, legal fees, or any other expenditures that we have to incur to bring that, purchase that particular product, as well as to bring it to a condition of usability. So that is before the use. And then during its lifestyle or life span, during its total life cycle, if it is a 5 years, for example, it could be 10 years. So during that whole period, what will be the operational cost? What will be the cost that we have to incur to run that machine, to hold that or use that fixed asset, to own that fixed asset? It could include, for example, electricity bills and so on, to operate that assets for the whole life cycle. And then once that asset is no more usable, when its life span is over, then we have to consider, estimate what would be the disposal cost. So basically, life cycle costing as an asset management technique demands us to consider not only the purchasing price, not only the initial cash outflow, but also the total cost to be incurred during the whole life cycle of that asset and even after that for the disposal. So that is life cycle cost as an asset management technique. And then when it comes to a product pricing technique. So in other words, when we consider life cycle costing as a product pricing technique, now we are taking the side or the angle of the seller, the producer. In the case of asset management, it is the dimension or the perspective of the buyer. Now we are looking at that from the perspective of a producer. So in that case, the logic is same. Logic is simple and the logic is same. That means we have to consider all the cost that we have to incur before we start production and during the production and what happens after the production. So the life cycle costing is applicable for products which has a definite lifespan, definite life cycle. For example, a particular model of a product or a version of a product which will be there in the market for 3, 2 or 5 or 10 years, and after that it has to be replaced by our new version or new model. So if the product has a definite life cycle, then the life cycle costing and life cycle pricing is applicable. So we start with estimating the pre-production cost, which could include, for example, research and development cost, any other initial legal cost, and all the other expenditures that has to be incurred before we start production. Protocol development, research and development, say for example licensing and legal fees, and all those expenditure. And then once the production is started, we have to calculate all the cost involved in that production phase. If it is a 5 years, for the whole 5 years. So that includes both fixed cost as well as variable cost. And the variable cost depends on the amount of units that we are going to produce. So there you have to consider two different cost elements, the fixed cost as well as variable cost. Remember in that, or consider in that, the total variable cost depends on the number of units we are going to produce in each year during this whole life cycle. So we have the pre-production cost and then the production period cost. And then after that, once that particular production period is over, the life cycle is over, then yet again we have to consider the disposal cost or any other estimated cost to be incurred after that. For example, committed cost after that, after sales services, warranties and guarantees. So whatever the cost remaining, even after you stop producing and selling that particular model or that particular product. So we calculate the total cost of the whole life cycle, pre-production, production and post-production cost. Put them all together. So that will bring us the total life cycle cost. Then we have to estimate the total units of production and sales. So during this whole production period, how many units we are going to produce and sell. So if you can estimate the total number of units to be sold during the whole life cycle, then we can use that to estimate the average cost of a product during the whole life cycle, which is basically the total life cycle cost divided by the total number of units to be produced during that life cycle. So then we get the average cost per unit. So once you get that, following the cost plus approach, then we can add our desired profit margin. And when we have the desired profit margin added to the average life cycle cost of the product, then that will be the price. The average price that we have to recover during the life cycle of the product. So initially it could be we can set a little bit of lower price than that average price, and then we can increase it and then we can drop it. That doesn't matter. So depending upon the market fluctuations, we can fluctuate the price depending upon the market situation. But however, on average, throughout the whole period, we have to achieve that average price at least. in order to gain our desired profit margin. So that is the overall logic of life cycle costing. In the textbook, there's a worked example of how do we do it. So if you go through the textbook, you can understand there's a case study in which I explain how this life cycle costing based pricing is carried out. So that's life cycle costing, either as an asset management technique or product pricing technique. Then, target costing. This is a very critical, strategically important framework. This is not simply a pricing technique. Yes, it involves deciding ultimately price, but it is more than a pricing technique. It is a strategic cost management framework. Therefore, I will elaborate and discuss this concept in more detail when I am discussing the strategic cost management in chapter, or in that particular chapter, forthcoming chapter. So until that, the key elements of target costing is this. The key concept is target costing basically means the fundamental equation is that cost should be equal to price minus profit margin. So the aim is to decide the cost at which we should produce the product. That's why we start the equation cost should be equal to price minus profit. So our target is to ultimately understand the cost at which we should produce this particular product. And the starting point is the price, that is the market. So unlike accounting cost plus pricing, the traditional cost plus pricing, in which case the price is equal to cost plus profit margin. So in that case, we start with the factory, calculate the cost on the basis of the way we carry out our production, and then add a profit margin and then decide the price. So we start from the factory, end in the market. Now, when it comes to the target pricing, we start from the market. So our marketing managers and the market surveyors and our strategic managers will first survey the market, understand the market, analyze the market, and then decide the price at which in this particular market or the market segment that we have to deal with. So we may consider the competitive pricing, consumer demand, consumer willingness to pay, consumer's ability to pay, and so many other factors, then ultimately decide this should be the price that we have to charge in the market. That's the starting point. Then we go downward, deciding if that is the price, and if our target profit is 10% of that, then we deducted that, then our total cost should be this much. If our total cost should be that much, then we break down that cost into its element. What should be our labor cost? What should be our component A cost, component B cost, raw material cost, overhead cost, and so on. So we have now targets for each of these cost elements. And then it goes down and down until it reaches the supplier. So ultimately, even our suppliers will have specific targets, cost, at which we have to acquire those components from the suppliers. So the challenge is for the manufacturing process. Challenge is for the engineers. Challenge is for the suppliers. Challenge is for the whole total management system to make sure that we can and we should produce all these elements and subsequently the total product at that target cost. So that is a pull strategy. We pull from the market downward towards the factory and the supplier. Then, when we are talking about the target costing as a framework constitutes of three key conceptual themes. The first one is what we call survival zone. Second one is target costing triangle. And third one is target costing process. So I have elaborated these things in the textbook, but as a summary point, target survival zone, that is the first element of target costing, first conceptual basis of target costing is survival zone. The survival zone basically outlines the zone in which the firm should operate in relation to three dimensions: price, functionality, and quality. What can be our minimum price and the maximum price? What should be the maximum level of functionality and the minimum level of functionality? And similarly, what should be the maximum level of quality that we can offer, and what should be the minimum level of quality that we have to offer? So the survival zone outlines the zone in which effectively the firm can operate in terms of three key strategic imperatives: price, quality, and the functionality. So that's survival zone. And then when it comes to target costing triangle, it considers three key perspectives or dimensions according to which the target costing should be carried out. First one is the competitor driven target costing. So where we will be considering through our costing exercises how we accommodate the competitive pressure and the market or the demand conditions. And then second one is designer directed target costing. So that's where we do the target costing in relation to the designing process of the product. How do we make sure that designer creativity is incorporated into the product and our total costing system? And the third one is supplier directed target costing. That's where we are trying to incorporate the supplier's support as well as supplier's creativity into our costing and management system. So when we combine all these three things, we have what we call a profit management system, consolidating three key dynamics: the market, the designer, and the supplier. So that's what we call triangle of target costing. And then finally, there is a specific process through which target costing happens, starting from the market up to the supplier. So this diagram summarizes that target costing process. And this is explained in this pricing chapter as well as in cost management chapter, because this is important in both dimensions. On the one hand, it can be considered as a pricing technique. On the other hand, more broadly, more strategically, it is a cost management framework. So that's the end of chapter 3. So to summarize everything we discussed in this chapter dealt with, broadly speaking, 4 key themes in 3 videos. The first one is the traditional pricing techniques, where we discussed neoclassical economic theory of pricing and accounting model of pricing, together with their strategic weaknesses. Then we explained the key topic of this chapter, that is the strategic pricing with market segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And then finally, in this video, we discussed 2 specific pricing techniques, life cycle costing, and target costing. So in my next video, I will be moving into organizational hierarchy related dimensions, especially the strategic performance management. So until that, thank you very much for watching this video. See you again.